So after that file, you then progress onto the sandpaper, this is just 150 grit sandpaper wrapped around a block of wood. The wood block helps to preserve the sandpaper, it doesn't end up wrinkling and whatnot. But yeah, place that along the length of the wood and just go to town until all the marks from the previous tools are gone. Now with this boomerang, I'll be going one more stage, this, which is the 320 grit sandpaper, which will remove the marks from the 150 that I've used before, and that'll pretty much get as polished as I need it to be. With this one, however, I'm going to be going through some more steps. After the 320, I'll be hitting it with 600 grit, 1000 grit, 2000 grit, and then steel wool. And once I've gotten all the every little imperfection out of this, then I'll be hitting it with some varnish. This one's not quite so pretty, so it's going to be getting paint. That's why I only need to go up to a 320, because that's about as good as you need it. So I'll do the final sanding stage for this one, which is I'll just take my 320 paper, fold it around my block here. Just like to give it a little crease so that the paper doesn't slip around on the block. Now we have it, and you just go to town. And this paper will give it a fine polish, and you'll almost start to see a reflection in the piece of wood. Like if you hold it at a sharp angle, you'll see light reflect off the surface. Like the smoother the boomerang is, the better its air performance will be, because a rough surface, there's a lot of drag there to slow it down. So the smoother it is, the longer it'll keep spinning, and the longer it'll keep flying in it. Okay, so that's both of them. Now sanded to 320 grit. Now before you do any finishing, you typically want to test it, because once you've got your seal on here, like varnish or paint or whatever, you can't do any more shaping without ruining it and having to start over. We're on to the final step of shaping, which has nothing to do with carving the wood anymore. We might have some fine finishing to do afterwards, but you actually have to bend the boomerang. So you ask yourself, how do I bend a boomerang, and why on earth would I want to do that in the first place? Well, sometimes you'll get a perfect airfoil on your boomerang, and you'll toss it, and it still won't come back. Like after testing, if it doesn't come back, you can do certain little tweaks to it to try to change its performance. Basically, there's two kinds of bends you can use on a wing to alter the boomerang's performance. One is like a dihedral kind of bend, where you bend it upwards. That's an exaggeration. By doing this, the center of gravity kind of gets lowered below the lifting area, and what this causes the boomerang to do is to kind of flutter in the wind like this. If it happens to be vertically oriented, that bend will cause it to want to try to become horizontal. Same if it's like this, it'll want to make it level out. The second kind of bend you can do is, instead of bending it upwards like this, you twist it. So that the leading edge always, you twist it upwards, so that as it hits the air collides with the underside and creates even more pressure here. So that one, instead of leveling it out, it makes it want to climb. It also makes it want to tilt in this direction, because the center of gravity is here. It's being lifted from over here. So it makes it want to tilt. The combination of those two forces is pretty much what makes it follow its path. One force makes it want to go up and tilt like this and lift. The other force makes it want to level out. And by balancing those two, you can get a circular flight path. That's why you want to bend. And now how to bend is another matter. With plexiglass, you use heat. So I've already bent two of my edges. I've got one more wing I'm going to bend just to demonstrate to you the principle. So you want to heat up both sides of the wing. Don't ever let the torch sit on one spot. You heat it up as a whole. Doing this, it'll start to soften up. Reach that point now. So I'll just give it a bit of a bend and hold it there while it cools it down, and we'll have our twist that we want. So relative to the center, I'm tilting it upward a bit and I'm twisting it a bit. And that'll enhance the lift and the flutter effect that I just mentioned. And there you have it. It's now bent. In case you're wondering, this finish was achieved after 2000 grit sandpaper and quadruple aught steel wool. Now on to bending wood. The blowtorch itself worked pretty well for the plexiglass boomerang, but how do we bend something like this, which is made out of wood? This is the plywood one. Well, what we do is you do the same thing. You heat it up, which softens the material, and then you apply the force you want to get the shape you desire, and as it cools, the material will harden back up again. But since wood is pretty flammable and porous, we're going to just dip it in some water here. That'll penetrate in there and it'll turn to steam as I heat it up. It will allow the wood to get hot enough to be bent without catching it on fire. So you could probably do the same thing, use a blowtorch to heat that up and bend it, as was done with the plastic one. But I'm feeling a little inventive here. I'm going to try sticking it in the microwave so that all this water on here can be turned to steam and heated up, and hopefully after 4 minutes or so this will be hot enough to allow me to bend it. As you can see right now, it's perfectly flat. I'm just going to pop up and use the microwave, and I'll be right back and we'll see if it worked. Well, so it turns out the microwaving works smashingly. I actually only had to have this in there for a minute. If you look on it on edge now, you'll notice the wings do not line up anymore. One of them is tilted upward a little bit. It's got that twist that I mentioned. And if you line up the bottom here, you'll also notice that the one wingtip is higher than the other one. So that's a successful bend using a microwave and a little bit of water. Now achieving that bend with the aluminum boomerang was not really too hard. It just involved some forcing of the metal. I just kind of wedged it in my armpit here, twisted it and bent it. Just kind of using my arm as though it was like a pipe bender or a metal bender, and eventually I got a nice twisted shape, which goes up slightly. Got a twist like this, and like that. Well, here we have the oak boomerang, and it's now polished up to past 2000 grit. It's now polished to quadruple aught steel wool grit, whatever the heck grit that happens to be. It's higher than 2000 anyway. And as you can see, there's no finish on here, no varnish whatsoever, but it's reflecting the light. So that lets you know that's fucking polished. Or damn polished. Excuse me. But the final step for this one will be varnish. I don't have to bend it. I was fortunate with this one because I cut it while the tree was still alive and wet, and as it dried out it just happened to warp into the perfect twist. So, final steps will be finishing. Well, here we are in the great outdoors, and as you can see, it's not exactly the kind of weather you'd want to throw boomerangs in. Toss a boomerang once in this stuff and it'll be lost until spring. Now this boomerang is actually ready to be finished. I'm just going to be popping some spray paint on it outside here so that I can avoid breathing in any toxic fumes. You should do stuff like this outside or in a well-ventilated area. So you want to shake your spray paint for about 2 minutes and then have at it. So you just proceed with even strokes across the piece. Whenever you start or stop spraying, make sure it's off the edge of the piece. And then hold your can about 20 centimeters away and have at it. You pulse it like that to prevent drips from happening. I'll just hit it from this side so as to get this edge as well. let that dry for a little bit and give it another coat. Hello! This thing is now just about done. I could technically call it done right now. It's got a nice kind of hammered gunmetal finish on the top of it, and I gave it a nice glossy finish on the back. What I'm hoping the difference between the two is the glossy finish. I want that to be a short surface, so glossy works for that. And the top surface, which I want to be a little longer, I gave it it's not a rough finish, but it's a mottled finish. And I'm hoping that'll kind of act like the surface of a golf ball and actually reduce the drag whilst increasing the surface area. What you do with paint, like the main reason for applying it is to protect it from water, because if a boomerang absorbs water, it'll change the weight, the center of gravity, the wood gets warped, all kinds of problems arise, so you gotta protect it from that. This makes a nice watertight barrier. I'll also be giving it some stripes. And one easy way to do that is just to make a mask like this. Just drew some marks on this sheet of paper and folded it in half to making sure they're lined up properly. Cut these out with a pair of scissors and got two nice holes out of it. And what you do with this is you just position it so it's lined up sort of with where your boomerang's center of gravity would be. If you recall, the center of gravity in this boomerang was right about here. So I'll just position this line so that it's lined up with that, and I'll spray paint. You want to have it nice and tightly. Pin that against the boomerang. Don't worry if you get a little bit of paint on your hands. It's not going to kill you. And same on the other side. Once the one side's done, again, line it up with the center of gravity and then line it up to make sure you're spraying the same places. And again, just grab your can of spray paint, spray on top of this. You want it to be nice and flat. Maybe tape the edges down. They'll probably work better. You get nice fancy little lines like this. Here's a close-up. Ooh. Ah. Now I'll start varnishing this one. In case you've never used varnish before, I'll show you how that's done. So I'm going to use some oil-based high-gloss varnish here. That's my preferred choice. I don't know why anybody would want to make something not glossy. You want to make sure that with oil-based varnishes that you do not shake it, because they'll just make bubbles in it and they won't come out as it dries. So rather than shake this up, you'll just want to use a nice clean stick and stir it, making sure you kind of pull any material from the bottom up to the top. And you do not want to make any bubbles. That's key. This is a pretty new can of varnish, so it's well mixed already and it's fresh. So I'll just start slathering it on here. You don't want it too wet. I tend to hold it by the middle here to start with. Put a thin coat on the one wing, flip it around, do the same, the opposite side of the same wing. Now you want to try to avoid getting any runs on here. That's why a thin coat, you don't want big drips. It'll just take forever to dry and then you'll just have to sand them down. So you make sure it's just a nice thin layer. Some to the other side. One of the reasons I prefer oil-based varnishes is because, well, they're waterproof, and oil-based varnishes penetrate into the wood, whereas water-based varnishes raise the grain and make a rough finish. They don't penetrate well, and they tend to peel off and look like crap. So oil's the way to go. Now I'm kind of just pinching it, kind of painted myself into a corner, but I do have a solution for this. This is the lazy man's way of painting both wings at the same time. And now that it's done, and except for the tiny little piece that I'm pinching here, I'll now take something with a small surface area. I'll just use my ruler here and balance the boomerang on there. That'll allow me to paint the final little bit that I was pinching, and I just gotta find a nice safe place to hang this thing while it dries. If you're lucky and good, you can avoid getting any fingerprints on this. Or any other marks. Okay, so this one has now a single coat of paint, and I'll set this aside to dry someplace safe, and it will probably end up needing about 3 or 4 coats with a very fine sanding in between to totally seal all the grain, and that's what I like to do. I don't like to have any pores visible whatsoever, and that way you'll know you won't get any liquid getting in there, any water. Yeah, there you go.